I'm Stephan Ohr. Welcome to the RSA Conference. It's a bright and sunny day here in San Francisco. Our pleasant environment may obscure the fact that today, tomorrow, and for days and months afterwards, we are under attack. Our personal computer connections, our communications networks, our megawatt servers are all under attack. There are agents out to steal our data, impair the functioning of our computer machinery, and otherwise do us grave harm. The security world is paralyzed as a consequence. On one hand, corporate cybersecurity managers must convince their staff that cyber threats are growing in scale and complexity, that the denial of service attacks aren't the products of a 400-pound hacker laying on his bed with a laptop computer. The problem of protecting private data is truly international in scale, and the identification of threats requires enormous investments in defense. Speakers and exhibitors at RSA and the interviews summarized here reflect a small sample of researchers, but these are soldiers on the front lines of data security. These researchers, whether they are resolving a stolen password issue or combining a terabyte data stream, are all addressing the same issue. What does a corporate entity have to do to keep the bad guys out? Here, Media and Entertainment Technology presents three views of the data security problem. The National Cybersecurity Alliance, NCSA, plays a cheerleader's role advising members to pay attention to security issues, update threat databases. At this year's RSA Conference, NCSA's Executive Director, Russ Schrader, points to state actors, including but not limited to Russia, North Korea, and others. These actors are numerous, Schrader advised. Their presence calls attention to the need for strengthening and reinforcement of the critical infrastructure. International actors can also recruit corporate employees. Simply by clicking on an unfamiliar link, corporate employees become dupes of enemy organizations. There's a major concern that enemy organizations will spend as much on developing threats as U.S. companies will spend on trying to protect themselves from a breach. In the current corporate environment, nobody opposes cybersecurity, or Schrader reminds us, but managers may resent the costs of implementing multiple defenses. It helps to see threats as scaled from small attacks, the result of, say, forgotten passwords, to those capable of crippling an entire organization. The ransomware demands, or IP thefts, were generally led by hackers, more than state actors. They'll try to bring down critical infrastructures like the electrical power grid. What are the issues and trends that you see in cyber territory? What are the things that the people you talk to on committee tell you about?
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Steve. I appreciate that question. Here at the conference, it's been very, very interesting because it's a combination of the state actor threats that we've been hearing about, whether that from North Korea, Russia, China, pick the ones that you like, and how to protect in part critical infrastructure. Another part is how to deal with it in our own lives, because when we're talking to employees about what they can do about cybersecurity, we have to remember that our employees are also citizens and doing things in their own homes as well. So it's a diametrically complementary rather than diametrically opposed view of cybersecurity. And once again, as it's been in the past few years, it's looking at layers of security rather than looking at having a hardened wall, realizing that there are always different kinds of threats and you have to be able to respond to them on different levels.
When you mention state actors, so that is among the most terrifying for each of us. How does that compare to individuals whose databases are subject to being held up to ransom? Are the same type of threat, or is there scaling that you must observe?
Well, there is definitely scaling that you have to look at. The ransomware comes usually from a different type of hackers. The different hackers are, the sole people who are doing it for the sport, some who are doing it competitively where they see it as a challenge, some are doing it from a criminal enterprise, some are doing it for intellectual property, and some of them are doing it as a security attack on critical infrastructure in the case of a war, such as going after electrical grid or infrastructure like that. So it's one of those things where you look at a lot of different threats that will affect you depending on your point of view, whether it's head of a government, whether it's head of an industry, whether even if it is a small business or what you're doing as a consumer.
Are we seeing different types of threats now, or is our awareness of cybersecurity growing?
Well, I think it's a bit of both. Certainly, we are becoming more aware of both privacy and of security as we constantly read the drumbeat of breaches that are happening, the constant retailers, but also the breaches that we've had at credit reporting agencies as well, where the attacks seem to be going for nodes of information rather than just endpoints of information. So the public has become much more attuned to the consequences of breaches. At the same time, technology never stops. You don't hear about, the criminal enterprises who are having their IT budgets cut, for example, or being resistant of dealing with legacy systems. So the march of technology continues on both sides. It's very much an arms race.
Each of the presenters here touch upon the Internet of Things at a different pace and in a different way. Russ Schrader of NCSA asks us to beware of bad actors. Martin McKay of Akamai asks us to look for thorns in massive data streams. Think of bad data embedded in terabytes media streams, the kind of streams that support, say, multiple high-resolution devices on an online sporting event. The data stream is too formidable to analyze, McKay reminds, without experience of experts aided by security tools that know how to spot an alien string in a massive transaction. The reliability of competing financial transactions with passwords and authentication, for example, depend on this kind of fine-combed data tracking. Threats embedded in the stream, sometimes unknowns, are identified immediately. McKay explains sometimes an unknown. A suspicious transaction is dropped to protect the integrity of the server transaction as a whole. But the reporting that follows will add to the threat library and the experience of security experts. We develop stories from Akamai teams, McCurry says. Very often, data breaches or hacks can be predicted in advance by tagging botnet activity. Inferences from all over the internet is part of what the Akamai Defender uses, machine learning and, in some cases, artificial intelligence to identify small bits and pieces of an attacker. We can't do this by hand, he tells us. What McKay calls credential abuse in the entertainment and hospitality industries, where massive data streams are processed without interruption, is often a consequence of stolen credentials. The storytelling is not quite the task of geniuses, but the software must be able to mount a reliable defense. Some 1.3 terabytes, equivalent to 10% of the data traffic between the US and Europe, can be harnessed to attach one customer. The company is continually developing defenses for new attackers. What are the threats that you see, the gotchas? What is the overall picture of the security industry today?
Well, I'm lucky enough to live at kind of an interesting intersection of all the technologies out there with Akamai. I have access to a lot of data that most people just are never going to see. We are one of the largest content delivery networks in the world, if you watch an online sporting event, if you're streaming video of some sort, if you're going to a banking site, the odds are quite likely that you're using Akamai's work. You're using our network to get that there. So I'm able to see all levels of types of attacks, from the most noisy DDoS attacks where you're actually seeing somebody trying to send terabytes of data over a line not meant to handle it, to botnet attacks or credential abuse attacks, on down to the most minuscule web attacks like a SQL injection attack. So I'm able to actually do reporting and sort of develop stories based on that from different teams within the company. And my role in large part is to help make something out of all of those attack types, make something out of all of that data that Akamai can share with the world and show people what the types of attacks that are happening.
I would assume you have an array of analytical tools and skill sets of members of your staff. Could you talk a bit about that?
Across the corporation, we have literally dozens of people whose role is to do research. I mean, that is what they do. And so we have a report that came out this morning that is from our DNS group, the spring report as we're calling it. And a lot of what that's talking about is how DNS activity is an indicator of botnet activity. So when you see somebody using a bot, something so like the Mirai or any of the other big botnet names that people know about, Turdot or any of these, what you can tell a lot about is when they make their DNS requests, when they go try and connect back to their command and control structure, that really tells you a lot about the tools and types of data that a attack is coming from, that the botnet is getting to fuel the attack. So the command and control structures just give us a lot of information about what the capabilities are and who's being attacked for those specific tools.
So I gather it's an intelligence operation in which you're looking for all the robbers of data and trying to draw pictures of how they use it. Is that correct impression?
A lot of it is taking little bits and pieces of data from all across the internet and drawing inferences from them, what we call credential abuse. So systems that are trying to go in and log in as you or me or somebody else using stolen credentials. And one of the things that we found about looking into that was that the entertainment industry, the gaming industry, and more importantly, the hospitality and travel industries are all seeing a ton of this sort of activity where people are just trying to use stolen credentials and lists and fake names to break into your accounts and see what they can find.
Do you have tool sets for tracing these threads? Or is it a staff of geniuses?
Well, no, the staff of geniuses get together and figure out how to make the computers do it without us.
NTT Security's Don Gray talks about the convergence of major threats with armies of little ones. It's no longer possible to view for security and IT as a separate thing. NTT is working on improving its data communication security in conjunction with its operating partners, Don Gray reminds us. Infrastructure management requires intimacy with the client's data structures. NTT Security spends about $2 billion each year spotting specific security challenges and developing trusted initiative platforms. NTT Security harnesses expert knowledge and uses a high level of granularity to comb out embedded faults. Gray says NTT Security has support from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. Its Common Security Framework, CSF, was created to help organizations manage and reduce cybersecurity, reduce the risk to critical infrastructure and industrial control systems. NTT Security offers compliance with federal mandates, Don Gray reminds us, while remaining adept in responding to new challenges. He recommends selling the need for security investments to your board of directors, as well as selling to large data customers, the data streams which carry security threats is not only increasing but also showing up in peculiar places. Case study that Don Grace shared with us points to Nest-like electronic thermostat that was put on the IoT network of a large corporation. This network was capable of reading IT nodes managed by a different distant server. System monitors were slow to recognize that IoT monitoring was a two-way data flow. The supposedly secure and classified data stream permeating the building could be read from a tropical fish tank on display in the company's lobby. This is something you would need to protect for. I'm looking at trends in the communications industry, trying to understand what are the major security issues, what are some of the solutions people are now starting to come up with. I'm wondering if you can give us an overview.
Yeah, sure. So I think part of what we're seeing is that people are starting to not think about security as a separate thing, that they're thinking about it as part of every other thing they're doing, whether it's an IT initiative for a new application or if it's a communications initiative to broaden the reach that they have or the ways in which they communicate with their market and their customers. So security is becoming embedded into those kinds of things. So that's part of what NTT Security is looking at. We work with our operating partners, our operating company partners, Dimension Data, NTT Data, and NTT Communications, to really look at what customers are trying to accomplish from a business perspective, and then give them a solution that can adapt to exactly the threats that they face and the needs that they have with their ecosystem of their IT. So that's a bigger picture level, that's what's happening. But really, what part of making that happen and making that work is having some depth of understanding of, particular security issues that people are facing. NTT Security, as part of NTT, NTT spends almost $2 billion a year on R&D research. And it's a significant amount of that is allocated towards security. So we're looking at other very specific security challenges that then tie into those larger adaptive solutions. For instance, we're working on a trusted initiative platform, MTI platform for IoT and OT solutions that would give developers a safe ecosystem to work within, to have security services available to them, security detection, authentication, authorization, those kind of capabilities, so they can focus on building the applications and the IoT solutions to meet their customers' needs.
And our speaker today, Kiro Mishra, is the CEO of NTT Security Americas. Previously, Kiro served as the Managing Director of Security Service Business at NTT Data Services with global P&L responsibility. Kiro's presentation today is titled The New Science of Cyber Security.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this briefing. On behalf of all my NTT colleagues, I really appreciate you all taking time today. Cybersecurity also has been looked at pretty closely. Over the last 8 to 10 years, I would say, NTT Group has acquired several cybersecurity specific companies across Europe and US. And during the same time, many of the existing group companies of NTT were also nurturing cybersecurity competencies. So in August of 2016, almost 20 months back, we took a strategic decision of pulling all those cybersecurity competencies together, and that's how NTT Security was formed. So the brand NTT Security is not that old, maybe around 20, 21 months old, but the underneath business has been there for years together. We have been serving customers across industry verticals, across geographies for several years, and you can imagine the kind of experience that NTT Group and NTT Security in particular carries from all those engagements. So if you look at last couple of years, there's a huge adoption and proliferation of digital technologies everywhere. And with that, a lot of existing large businesses have been decimated because they were not able to catch up to the changing dynamics. And there were several new models which have come up. And those models are essentially built on all new technologies around cloud, artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, and so on and so forth. With that, new set of technologies, or digital technologies as we call, we definitely get a lot of business benefits. But at the same time, we are exposed to, as enterprises, or our end customers for that matter, are exposed to new kind of threats. And that way, if you look at the threat landscape itself, is becoming very complicated, and the threat actors, for that matter, are becoming more advanced, more mature. The way we look at a situation like that in a digitally transformed world, cybersecurity is extremely, I would say, distributed, yet hyper-connected. It's very, very tightly networked. And that throws up a lot of challenges for a lot of businesses. When we looked within and we saw how we could reorient or re-strategize ourselves and our approach to basically stay relevant, we looked at basically 3 pillars of the new strategy, as we are calling. And in a digitally distributed, hyper-connected world, we think cybersecurity must be collaborative, cybersecurity must be adaptive, and cybersecurity must be comprehensive. This new initiative, which we call as the New Science of Cybersecurity, and that New Science of Cybersecurity initiative is essentially built on these 3 pillars, which is collaborative, adaptive, and comprehensive. And if we look at how do we package those information, package those intelligence for the benefit of customers, for the benefit of practitioners in the industry, every month we produce a threat report which talks about the changing dynamics of all this threat data, threat intel that we receive. And every year we come out with a more comprehensive threat report, which talks about the changing dynamics and where it is moving, what are the areas that we should be safeguarding against, and so on and so forth, and which is pretty highly regarded by our customers. We had the announcement on entity security being a part of Cyber Threat Alliance. And as you might know, Cyber Threat Alliance is industry's first officially organized group of cybersecurity practitioners who collaborate with good faith to bring threat information and threat knowledge together. And based on that, they create solutions. Or I would say based on that, they share that information amongst themselves to basically protect their end customers in a better way. Entity Security has joined that group, and by virtue of being a part of CTA, we would not only get a very good understanding, or I would say the enhanced understanding of threat landscape, we would also use that understanding to improve on our product and services so that we continue to stay more relevant to our customers.